Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. We've been gone for a long time, but you know what? Welcome to Turnbark Time. I'm the Turn.
I'm Bark.
And we are going to be here a long time, even though we took a long break. Scott Ramsey, I know you're not in your head right now. Welcome back to everybody. We are on season 4, episode 11. Like that little wiggle. Barker, was that a prediction in March Madness? Were we going Texas Longhorns there? Was that what that?
Boo.
Boo. Okay, just checking. So, it is a fun episode today. We are covering probably one of the most anticipated decisions, I would say, that the country has had in not even a long time, because there's the anticipation about the other case. So we're talking about the Biden loan forgiveness plan, I guess is the easiest way to say it.
Yeah.
So he offered in a campaign promise, he said he would work on forgiving student loan debt. His education department came out with a plan that would give people who made under $125,000 a loan forgiveness of $10,000 if they had a federal student loan, and $20,000 if they were a part of the Pell Grants. So, Barker, take it away, because these actually have names, ladies and gentlemen. These aren't just the Biden court cases. They have names.
Well, this is from looking at the White House press briefing, or the information that they're putting out. They're saying that the cost of college at a 4-year public or private university or college has tripled, and that even accounts for inflation. Like after inflation, it's tripled. The cost has tripled. Pell Grants used to cover 80% of tuition costs, or like the cost of going to school, and now it only covers about a third. So it's pushing a lot more people to have to take out loans and whatnot. And so there's kind of 2 court cases that are floating around. You said most important decision, and I was wondering if people were going to think like it was like a MMA fight or something. Did Jake Paul beat an
We
actual...
had to go to the CAD.
Yeah. So there's 2 different court cases. The first one is Biden versus Nebraska. And it's Biden versus Nebraska plus 5 other states, but nobody lists the 5 other states in the majority of the articles. They're just like, Nebraska gets top billing because they filed the case first, I guess.
So we got, really quick, it's Biden versus Nebraska, but it's Arkansas, Iowa, Kansas, Missouri, and South Carolina, along with Nebraska.
Okay. That was filed in 2020, I believe. And it essentially, if you were to go like somewhere like OYES, and look at Supreme Court cases, because I know that's what we all do in our spare time. The 2 big questions is, number 1, does Nebraska have standing to bring the case? And I think that's the big question that everybody's wondering about. Because the states that are suing the federal government, it's not their money that is at hand. So they're like, the question is are these states harmed by the action of the Biden loan forgiveness plan? Right? It's kind of the idea that if somebody robs somebody, I can't sue on behalf of my neighbor who got robbed.
Yeah. And rewind really quick. It's standing, just for legal precedent or legal jargon, is do you have the right to sue in court? So the first question is, do these states have the right to sue the Department of Education in court?
Which has been a historically significant question in a number of other cases. Just off the top of my head, I think about like when the Trail of Tears was passed and Native Americans tried to sue the federal government. And then the federal government came back and said, well, you're not citizens of the United States because you belong to your tribe, which is your country. So you lack standing in the courts of America because you're not citizens of the United States. And then the other one that blares in my mind is the Frederick Douglass case, where they tell Frederick Douglass that he is a slave and therefore it's property. Or Dred Scott, sorry. Screwed that up.
Yeah. No,
Dred Scott
Frederick
case.
Douglass was a freeman runaway. Yeah. But anyway, yes, Dred Scott.
But anyway, the idea that a slave can't sue because they were property at that time, probably one of the most gut-churning decisions of the Supreme Court. But
this is why he's not in the Supreme Court anymore.
Yeah. So that's the first kind of question is Nebraska the essentially the right agent to come forward, like they have to prove that they're harmed by this, which isn't probably going to go well for them. I don't think. But and then number two, I guess the question that probably has more legs in my opinion is, does this plan exceed the authority of the U.S. Secretary of Education, or does it violate the Administrative Procedure Act? So essentially, like, did Biden jump the gun and not do things the right way, or are we asking the U.S. Secretary of Education to do more than their job does? That's the first case.
That's just one. There's two that are put together here.
The second one is the U.S. Department of Education versus Brown. Not Brown versus the Board of Education. Different court case.
A lot of time passed.
So a person named Myra Brown is suing on the grounds that they have student loan debt and their student loans are privately held. They're not through the federal government. And so they are offered no remedy for their college debt because they chose private loans as opposed to going through federally backed loans. And then there's another co-defendant, or I think that's our plaintiff. Sorry. Yeah. My Judge Judy jargon's
lacking. You're right. It's a co-plaintiff, Alexander
Taylor.
Thank you.
Who's suing. He qualifies for $10,000 worth of debt relief, but did not have a Pell Grant, so does not receive the full $20,000. And so they're kind of arguing, they're arguing the constitutionality of it. That's, I think when I looked at it, that's what it said, is like, is it constitutional? And it really all goes back to the HEROES Act of, I think it's originally 2001.
2003, I think.
It's 2001, then it gets amended in 2003, extended in 2005, and extended in 2007, which stands for the Higher Education Relief Opportunities for Students Act, and initially was created to prevent people serving, if I read this right, people serving in the military overseas, like places like Afghanistan or Iraq, from incurring negative debt from college because they were essentially stopping college to go fight and protect the United States and our interests abroad.
Yeah.
To prevent them from essentially like accruing interest or like having a financial harm from serving their country.
Yeah. And
so it's been extended numerous times for military personnel. And so the argument has come, even under the Trump administration, they used the HEROES Act as a justification for stopping the stopping loans from gaining interest during the pandemic. And so in a way, I think that strengthens the Biden administration's argument, because now it's not just, the HEROES Act was originally passed by Bush.
Yeah.
So it's a bipartisan, both parties have used it. So it's not like it's a partisan policy that only Democrats have used and Republicans have never used it. The Republicans made it, used it, under Obama got extended. And then under the Trump presidency, they used it to prevent the accruement of interest during the pandemic. And so now Biden is using that as a justification for saying the pandemic was a national emergency. And so we don't want people to have negative impacts from this national emergency. And I think that argument is it's not super rock solid, in my opinion, but I'm not a legal expert, so.
And neither of us claim to be, by the way. So if we give our opinions at all this, it does not, please don't hold us liable, because we are not experts in this at all.
We are not lawyers.
No, not at all.
And I don't think Legal Eagle has a video yet, so.
Legal Eagle.
Legal Eagle's great. I love Legal Eagle. Unpaid promotion.
Yep. As they all are.
Yeah. Nobody gives us money.
No.
Except for the schools we work for, but
that's not on our time. That's not to do this our job.
Yeah. No. I'm trying to remember the people actually thought that it was going to be a pretty slam dunk case for the states that were challenging the Biden loan forgiveness program. And then Solicitor General Elizabeth Prelogar,
Yeah.
I think it was like 2 weeks ago,
Mhm.
had like a stellar day in court
Yeah.
and essentially like made the argumentation fairly clear that everybody's been getting money based on the idea that COVID was a national emergency,
Yeah.
and kind of brought it back around that way and kind of made some connections. And the lawyers representing Nebraska did not do
A great
a
job.
stellar job.
Yeah.
They kind of just assumed that they were going to be successful, and I guess, for lack of a better term, rested on their laurels
Yeah.
and then got beat. But it all comes down to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court won't pass the actual ruling until probably about June.
End of June is usually when they hand out their decisions, and it has to do before the summer recess. So
Yeah, so like the way that it works, like people have come in and given testimony, and they've done all the, essentially, like, people have presented all the evidence,
Mhm.
and I guess they're kind of arguing the merits of it right now.
And one of the things that I found super interesting, pardon me, was that when, for the most part, legal arguments actually in the Supreme Court are not as important. A lot of times it has to do with the legal briefs that are given to the justices ahead of time. And the arguments in court, like the oral arguments, are more about the justices getting a chance to ask questions. And so the questions that are asked are going to be around, the standing, right? And then going from there, arguing, because even the I apologize, what's the Ms. Brown's and Mr. Taylor's argument, do they even have legal standing to make this happen? So, but it will be interesting because, again, people are taking it as the 6-3 majority, although Barker and I have talked about it's usually a 5-4 or 5-3-1 majority because there's a wild card that's hanging out over there. So,
Maverick.
yeah. So, but it will be interesting to see how they rule on this, and everyone's going and fleecing into everything that's ever been said or written. Like I know that one of the things that popped up immediately was Clarence Thomas has written about, and he's a hardline conservative justice, believes in originalism, right? Like he is very, true to his word. He for him, his sake, he's very consistent at what he believes, and he does not falter on those belief systems. But he's even written about the crushing weight of student loan debt. But again, that's something people are like, oh man, that's a shot. But it's like, no, he's going to rule on its constitutionality of the issue at hand in front of him.
Yeah, and I think we've kind of talked about this prior to recording, that it's going to come down to conservative justices, conservative in the sense of the Supreme Court, generally tends to be, what's your interpretation of the Constitution?
Yeah.
And I think more of the, like, conservative justices tend to take a very strict interpretation and believe in, like, the enumerated or like the written out powers in the Constitution.
Yeah.
And this is very much, executive orders are very much kind of an implied power. Like, there's a lot of latitude where it says the president can do stuff that they see fit. And it's kind of weird because we have this act that was passed by Congress, but rather than passing a new bill, we just kind of keep, like,
extending it,
adding time, adding time to the one from 2003. And now, instead of just adding time, we've also drastically broadened the number or the kinds of people who benefit from the program.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, like, you could say we're biased. We're both college graduates. So, I mean, we both went to school and got degrees and, like,
yeah,
work in education and understand that a lot of what public education does is promote that kids further their education at these institutions, and looking at cost, and, there's these different programs like you have Perkins loans. It's like, so this is all designed to help people who get federal loans. And the reason that people get federal loans when they fill out FAFSA or the Pell Grant is because of financial need based on economics.
Right.
And so what they're trying to do is they're trying to help people. Essentially, the argument the Democrats are going to make is that they're trying to make it so people can be more socially mobile. If you come from a low income household and you're already at a disadvantage to access higher education, you're even more likely, you're at more of a disadvantage because once you graduate, you're stuck under this crippling debt. And the Biden administration has, in that same briefing on the White House website, has a number of different, like, so like there's a construction worker who has like a management certificate. He can use this program and his loans go from $200 a month to like $80 a month.
Yeah.
A single public school teacher making $44,000 instead of paying, this much a month, is paying under $100 a month. So the whole idea is not to wipe out all student loan debt. It's
Right.
just to make it more manageable, so that instead of these, I don't know, like the federal government or private loans, but I guess the private loans, people are still going to make their money. But I mean, that's the problem, is that there was actually a political cartoon on Fox that I saw today on Fox News, saying that, the push to get kids to go to higher education is just almost like feeding and empowering like predatory lending,
Yeah.
where people, again, the argument is if you've got the money and if you don't qualify for federal loans, you should theoretically have the means to,
Yeah.
put yourself through college. But I guess if the court doesn't rule against this, it potentially opens the door to almost like every loan being subsidized or being done through the government, or the government having more, I can see more regulation on those loans. So not eliminating them, but like maybe capping interest rates, or,
right.
Trying to make it so that it doesn't negatively economically impact younger people. And there's even, they were saying like people who are senior citizens with outstanding college debt.
Mm-hmm.
Think about that. Senior citizens over 65 and they have outstanding college debt. Because everybody's going back to school, retooling, trying to, my dad at like 55 tried to go to college because he lost his job and had to try and find a new spot in the economy, so like it's not just younger people.
No.
And like even in our local community, people trying to buy houses, if you're paying $200 a month, like that extra $300 a month, if there's two of you and you both have $200, that's $400 a month that you're paying to college loans that you can't put towards a mortgage. You can't put towards a car payment. Can't, if you wanted to send your kids to like maybe like sports or a club, you can't do that because you don't have that money.
Well, and that's one of the other side arguments of that too, is that, the shutdown, because the pandemic in my mind is still going, it still exists. It's more of an endemic now, but it's one of the biggest things is economies around the world took a hit, right? Like because you couldn't spend, people weren't going out, recreational things weren't running. And now one of the things you can do is even chopping that $10,000 off people's loans. That's eliminating. There's actually a large handful of people that their entire student loan will be wiped out if this goes through. And that's fantastic for them. But at least just seeing 10,000 come off that loan, with the zero interest payments that have been going on, people have made the argument that it'll boost the economy because I'll feel more comfortable being able to spend money on things that are not necessities and can move forward from there. And then that obviously, because to have an economy function, you have to have people that are buying and selling. So it's very interesting. I don't know if in my mind, like you said at the beginning, it's a stretch. Like I think that if the justices come back and rule that these plaintiffs have standing and that this is outside of the executive branch, I won't be shocked. And I don't know if I'll be upset. I mean, obviously people have a right to be upset, but if we are just looking straight at the Constitution, it's a bit of a stretch to say that is a legal standing. And like you said, like I won't say every, but a lot of decisions that come from the court will then later be used to do other things or to limit other things because, the court has already said this and they've established precedent, which obviously precedent can be overturned, but usually not that fresh. So,
yeah, it could begin to potentially throttle other members of the executive branch that serve underneath the president, other secretaries of other departments, Secretary of Defense, Secretary of Energy, EPA, all those other things.
Yeah.
I think if you put the throttle on one, you put the throttle on all.
correct.
Is I guess the fair statement. I don't know. I mean, I can argue it both ways. I can see very
Absolutely.
clearly where it doesn't, you're giving money away is what people would say, but it's like,
Right.
but we have a number of welfare programs that we have in this country where we give money from some people to other people
Yeah.
for some benefit because of they qualify in some way, usually on economic means or purposes.
It's because we're promoting the general welfare, Barker.
Yeah. And I mean, the people with means theoretically have the means to pay it off or finance it.
Yep.
I also think very strongly that the cost of college is becoming ridiculous. But because of the capitalist nature of our country, I don't see that slowing down, unfortunately. But yeah, so I mean, honestly, we're really not giving you a conclusion. We're honestly kind of like,
and we can't.
what we tell you not to do in class. Don't pick the middle road.
I would pick. I have no problem picking a side in this one, just because I honestly think that the justices will come back and say that this is not constitutional. And all I'm basing this off of is the argument. Like I said, the arguments from the Solicitor General were fantastic, but I think at brass tacks, the justices will come back and say, like you said, this is it's not an enumerated power, so this is an overreach. So I think that's what will happen. But again, I can see both sides. I could write a counterclaim or a claim for either side, and justify it and have strong evidence that justifies it. But I think at the end of the day, if I'm a guessing man, and I won't know if I'm right until June, so I got another 3 months. So,
and I would say that the Supreme Court's going to rule on based on constitutional precedent, not the court of public opinion.
Right.
In the court of public opinion, I think there's a large amount of bipartisan support.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people who are, even depending on what side, doesn't matter what side of the political spectrum you are. If you went to college, you got to pay for your degree. And so, but that's also where there's kind of a populist movement against it that says, well, that's what you get. If you can't afford to invest in yourself and get a college degree, then don't go get a college degree because you can't afford it.
Yep.
So
it's a rock and a hard place. Catch-22.
I would say, if I had to pick, I would say I lean towards it getting struck down. But I guess my hope is that they don't.
Yeah. And so my question is, though, Bark, if you don't strike this down, so you let it go, right, and let it run, does it become a one-time thing, or does it become a debate that we have every year, every millennium, every 10 years, every 20 years? Because here's the deal. Like, I think that, like you said, it opens a can of worms. So if they choose and say, hey, it's a one-time dealio, right? What stops the president from saying, oh, but this is a one-time deal? Oh, but this is a one-time deal. So
there has to be a declaration of emergency, which I think is what they would say, because it does say in a time period of emergency. So it can't be just for funds.
Yeah,
and it has been tied to the pandemic, but I think makes it a little like unstable of an argument is that a lot of the debt was accrued prior to the pandemic. So I think that kind of hurts the argument for the Biden administration a little bit because of how broad it is. Yeah. But I think they're trying to find a middle path. They can't go full Bernie Sanders where like college is free, community college is free, but they're trying to find, it'll probably be a campaign point in 2024 for the Democratic Party
Yeah.
is some sort of way to offset the cost of 4-year or university education.
Yeah. Okay. Well, again, we know this probably wasn't, you wanted your answer and you're not going to get an answer for 3 months. I hate to break that to you. So it will be one of the big decisions that comes out of the court, though. They will hand it down and everything like that. So we'll see if anything gets leaked, I guess. So hopefully not. But anyway, Bark, anything else?
Patience is a virtue.
It really is. And as I told my mother, it's one that I was not born with. I had to learn it. So, all right, guys, we hope you had a good night. Stay tuned. Next week's episode.
Canadian Super Pigs.
You won't want to miss that. Sweet. Easy. I know you have one. Go ahead.
No. I had just, we have to root around for it, but
well, all right. Until next time, I'm the Turn.
I'm the Bark.
And we're going to be here a long time. Have a good night, everybody.
Be safe.
By golly, you just be well.